Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As promised, I have a very special guest with us in the studio today. Good old friend, and it's nice to see you. It's Terry Bourgeois. Terry lives right here in the town of Lockport. He is a Navy veteran and the founder of Empire State Ride, which I can't wait to hear more about. Terry, how are you?
I'm great, Rob. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. I guess we'll get started. I do want to learn more about the ride and everything you're doing today, but let's first go back in time. Tell me a little bit about growing up and what led you to join the Navy.
Yeah, so growing up, I actually grew up in North Dakota on a dairy and beef farm in North Dakota. We had 7 kids in the family.
Wow.
I had a really interesting upbringing on the farm, literally in the center of North Dakota. People think it's cold in Buffalo, but they've got nothing on North Dakota. Because when the Gulf Stream dips down, it dips down right at the point of where our farm used to be. But anyhow, my upbringing was super interesting. My mother ran for U.S. Senate twice.
Wow.
And ran for state governor once as an independent, kind of a renegade, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that was an interesting, time in my formative years. And one of my younger sisters was Korean. We adopted her from Korea, so we had a lot of Korean friends. And then we were also kind of a Vietnamese refugee camp for a while. And during the summers, we would have inner city kids from Chicago come out and stay with us on the farm. So typically black children from Chicago. We had a brother and sister, and one year we had 3 of the family members come out and visit with us. So I grew up in a very diverse culture in the middle of North Dakota on a dairy farm, which I find kind of fun to share with people.
Absolutely.
And so that was my upbringing with a lot of diversity. And, I don't think the farm life was ever for me. I would frequently say, there's got to be more out there. And I ended up going to a vocational school, and it was power plant technology. Because the power industry is very significant in North Dakota. And so that was, if you were going to get a good paying job, that was the one to get, is to try to get into one of the power plants. So I went to power plant technology at Bismarck State College. And in that program, the instructors were ex-Navy. And they convinced me that, in fact, in their words, if I were to join the nuclear naval program and go through that program, that I could come back with my lunch bucket and go right into a power plant. A lot of the management at the power plants were ex-Navy nukes. And that was kind of the premise. Two things. One, there's got to be more out there, and two, this promise of a great experience and education in the Naval Nuclear Power Program. So that's what I did. I signed up and ended up joining the volunteering for the submarine program. And, they say Navy stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. And so I volunteered to join the Navy, and I volunteered to go on submarines, and pretty much my whole life has been surrounded by volunteering. So I never learned the lesson. So that's how I got into the Navy.
That's fantastic. Wow, that's a lot. Could write a book on just that section. Now, when you were in, so forgive the terminology, but the boat, right? Where did you travel? Was there any specific destination or something of interest that even now you think back about?
Yeah, so I served on 2 fast attack submarines. And the first one I joined, and let me back up a little bit. The Naval Nuclear Power Program involves 2 years of training before you ever go to sea. So it's kind of a lengthy program, and the attrition rate's pretty high. Back then, I don't know what it is now, but it was about a 60% attrition rate in the naval nuclear program. So it was pretty extensive. And my first boat was based out of Vallejo, California. It was in a refueling overhaul. So I went to my first fast attack submarine towards the end of a refueling overhaul. And then we moved that boat from Vallejo after refueling around to Norfolk. So on that submarine, most of my time was spent in the North Atlantic. Not much to see under the ice cap. In fact, I think, and it was busy. We were, man, we were always at sea. We always there was a competition, not a competition, but animosity, maybe is the right term, between fast attack submarines and what we call boomers, the ballistic missile submarines. Sure. Because the ballistic missile submarine crews would rotate. They would, the boats were always out, and the crews would alternate. So they would alternate 3 months at a time. And we didn't think that was really fair because we were out just all the time. And we were married to our boat. We could never leave it. So anyhow, I spent a lot of time in the North Atlantic. And so I didn't see much. Occasionally, I remember on that boat, we had a couple of breakdowns where we got to go to a port. Actually,
a welcomed problem.
Yeah. So Scotland, there used to be a boomer base in Scotland, and one time we had to pull in there for some repairs. But even when we were in there, I volunteered to do a major part of the work that we needed to do to get this piece of equipment that had failed off of the submarine and back on again. So I didn't get to see Scotland either. So we were busy dewiring things. I was an electrician, so we had to dewire a bunch of stuff and wire it back up. So on that first boat, I didn't see. I don't even think that we, out of all the time we spent at sea, and there was one year where this was before they changed the deployment rules. Or actually, you know what? It wasn't either. They changed the deployment rules, and so back then we would go out a few days short of deployment so we could turn around and go back out again in a couple of weeks. We didn't have to have the mandatory in-port time. And so we were out at sea for, I think, almost 300 of 365 days.
That's incredible.
So we were gone a lot. You'd leave in the spring and come back in the beginning of winter. You lose whole seasons. So that boat, didn't see anything, was gone an awful lot, and gives you a context on life that life goes on, right? You literally you kind of disappear for a long time, no contact with anybody, and the only contact we could have were what we called familygrams, where you could get a 40-word message from a family member.
The original Twitter, yeah.
And, yeah, you're right. I never I never thought about that. Familygram, Twitter. That's interesting. But that was crazy because it wasn't on a set schedule. But you knew when we would go to periscope depth, and if familygrams came, rumor would spread quickly throughout the boat that if the familygrams had come. So you'd kind of, as soon as you could, run up by the Radio Shack and look at the board to see if your name was on there. And the families couldn't send them every time. Even, I don't think they were limited. So it was very infrequent one-way communication.
Wow.
So to your question, what did I see? First boat, not a thing. I always say that I've traveled around the world a few times, and it's gray and has meters. So
it's very noisy at night.
And then after my first submarine, I did a shore tour in Idaho. What's the Navy doing in Idaho? Well, back then, it doesn't exist the Navy part, I don't think exists in Idaho anymore, but I don't know that for sure. There was a very large tract of land in the desert of Idaho where I think the name of it changed a couple of times, but I think when I was there, it was called Idaho National Engineering Laboratories, INEL. And a lot of experimentation went on related to nuclear power. In fact, the Army had the first nuclear reactor. I think it was called SL-1.
Good old Army, yeah.
That was based out of there. And there was a bad accident way back. I don't know. I think this was in the 50s maybe. There was a reactor accident out there that was serious, which we learned a lot from. So thanks, Army, for teaching us. But anyhow,
happy to help.
Where I was at, we had my first training, live training, was on a prototype of the it was like the first nuclear-powered submarine, Nautilus, the USS Nautilus. So I trained on the engine room for the USS Nautilus,
Wow.
which was a prototype.
Yeah.
And then I went back there as staff after my first fast attack submarine and trained people how to operate the engine room for the USS Enterprise. So they had 2 fully functional reactors, one fully functional engine room, just exactly like what is on the ship. And we trained people how to operate it before they were ready to go to sea. And so my job there was training naval officers. I was enlisted, but I qualified for a position normally held by only officers. In fact, enlisted people could not serve in this position at sea, at least in the submarine force. But so that was my job for about 4 years in Idaho. And again, your question about what did I see? Idaho was fantastic, right? People used to ask me where my favorite places were that I lived, and I would say 3. One of them was Northern California, which was beautiful, and Idaho, and then here in Western New York. Well, I've been away from both of those long enough that Western New York wins hands down. But anyhow, so I was in Idaho as a staff tour. And then after that, I went back to my second fast attack submarine, the USS Tucson, which was in new construction. So we built that submarine, and I was on her, taking her through initial sea trials in one short little mission, and then I left the Navy.
And what year would that have been?
That was in 1996.
96, okay. Wow, that's incredible. A lot of firsts.
Yes, yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, the theme of this week's episode is leadership and teamwork. That's kind of the theme here. I'm wondering, was there someone or a particular lesson, either mentor or leader in your Navy career where you learned a lesson that you still think about often today, or somehow changed the trajectory of your life? And I know I had my connections to certain leaders. I'm just curious about your experience.
Yeah, I think there were 2 major influences on me, which interestingly, one of them, the influence was relatively brief but significant. And that was just prior to going in. One of my instructors at the Power Plant Technology School took me aside, and he was a boiler technician in the Navy back when he was in. And he said, "Hey, Terry, let's go to lunch, if you don't mind. I'd want to talk to you about something." And his name was, I think he's probably gone now, but L.G. McGregor. And he said, you're going places where you're going to be in a lot of different positions in your life. And he said, he told me, I want to talk to you about God. And I still get emotional about it because it was very significant. And he told me about his belief in God. And he said, I just want you to know what I know and what I feel. And when you find yourself in situations where you need help, and seemingly no one's around, know that you can always count on God. And just tell him, just talk to him. So that had a profound impact on me prior to going in, and it still does today. So thank you, LG McGregor.
Yeah.
You made an impact.
Absolutely.
And it took a lunch, right? It just took a little bit of time and less than probably 30 minutes. But he made an impact on my life that you're never alone. Just talk to God and he'll be there for you. So that was big. The second, there's probably many that if they were listening to this say, well, what about me? Because there were a lot. But the another one that was significant was a master chief that I was a newbie. He was very senior. And I got to know him fairly well because we ended up carpooling when I was in Vallejo. And he had a statement that he told me once. He said, no matter what you're doing, be professional. And no matter what you're doing, be the best you can be. Don't worry about awards. Don't worry about promotions. If you focus on just being the best you can be, do your job well, and the rest of it will come. And I took that to heart as well. So, even to this day, it's very humbling to get recognition and awards, but that's never been what it's about for me. And he taught me that.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. It's some excellent leadership. And, of course, now you have migrated, of course, into leadership roles all over the place. I guess my final question is really open-ended. I kind of want to catch up to where we are today. But thank you for sharing that. It's an incredible story. So walk me through the transition from the Navy. Okay, you're turning in your sea bag or what have you, and you're doing paperwork. And did you have a plan? What was the transition like? Peaks, valleys, or you could fast track. But I am always fascinated because no two transitions are the same. So what was it like for you going and eventually becoming, and I do use that word intentionally, becoming a civilian again, which is tricky. In fact, you're actually not a civilian. You're becoming a veteran. So walk me through that and tell me about what's going on now and just take it from there.
Yeah. So, my transition was nerve-wracking. It was a big leap into the unknown when I left. I had 12 and a half years when I left. I had a good position. I was an E7, so a Navy chief, which back then in those days, chief was not an easy level to get to. So I had 2 years under my belt as a chief petty officer. And leaving was a big decision. I had 8 years to go to retire. But my leaving was driven by a few things, but one of them, you might reflect, it might go back to what I said at the beginning of our discussion about there's got to be more out there. but that wasn't the big driver. It was my little sister, who we adopted from Korea that I had mentioned, was killed in a car accident. And she was married about 2 or 3 months prior to her death. And our operational tempo was just too busy. I could not leave to go home for the wedding. But when the accident happened, we were at sea, and they waited till we pulled into port to tell me that this happened because I wouldn't have been able to function. But so we pulled in time for me to get on a plane and make it to the funeral. And when that happened, it flipped my brain a little bit. I was like, it was a huge loss, just losing her. And, you know, like, I guess my life priority shifted a little bit. I just couldn't, I was professional in my Navy career till the very end. But my heart just wasn't in it. I just couldn't, no matter how hard I tried, I just knew that I was not doing the Navy any favors by staying, and I wasn't doing myself any favors by staying because my heart wasn't there. So I had a family, 2 kids, and I had no idea what I was going to do, really. So I didn't have a plan necessarily. I went to connected with some headhunters and found a job with this company called Praxair.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
And when I interviewed with them, the interview went great. Interesting side note about that. The night before the interview, we did a practice interview, and the recruiter told me, "You're never going to get hired by these people. You've got some issues, dude." Because I was having some hard times at work. I was frustrated with some of my crew, and it came out in my practice interview. So,
well, we know how accurate recruiters are. So
anyhow, I got hired with Praxair in Colorado, and so I moved to Colorado with the family, and I started as a technician. And that was a big deal because, here I am in middle management, if you will, in the Navy. And I had a lot of responsibility. I brought people together from all over the country and different commands for that new startup that we did. We were the plank owners for the USS Tucson. And so to take crew that never had worked together before, get them banded together and go through a initial criticality, start up with a brand new reactor, inspections of the submarine and getting it ready to go to sea, that's a lot of accountability. And I started completely over at the bottom of the ladder as a technician, and the civilians, through no fault of their own, saw me as I was the same. I was equal with someone that was just out of high school, and that was hard because kind of the who I was gone, and it didn't matter. In fact, I remember one time, a few years into my career, I made a comment. I was asked to write something about myself. And I put in what I wrote, that I had a successful a successful military career. And this manager I had said, "Take that out. You just served." And that was, that hit me.
Yeah.
And it was reflective of how I think, I can only speak for myself, but I think a lot of us were treated. You lose that identity. So my transition really kind of wasn't that pleasant from a transitionary standpoint, but it was what it was, and you can't cry over spilt milk. You just got to suck it up and reflect back to that one mentor I had that said, "Whatever you are, be a good one, and be professional." And again, I applied that. I took it to heart. And I advanced pretty quickly. I was assigned to my first job, I guess I wasn't assigned anymore. I get used to it. Maybe I was. To a brand new technology that we had there, an air separation plant. That was an ultra high purity plant. So it produced gas off of a distillation column that was less than 1 part per billion of impurities, and it fed a semiconductor customer. So I kind of got a niche immediately with this brand new technology. No one in the company really knew how to operate it because it was brand new, and I became kind of an expert on this technology. And we sold a lot of them over the electronics industry back then, like now, was doing really well. It was booming. And so I kind of developed a niche in the semiconductor industry as it relates to gases. And my career with the company was almost 13 years focused on working between engineering, sales, business, and customers as it relates to industrial gas supply systems to semiconductor customers. In that role, I was able to travel the world. So I spent time in Malaysia.
From outside of
Yeah, outside the Navy. But it's funny, right? I
had sunsets and everything.
I found out that, you know what, guess the world isn't all gray and have meters. There's more to it than that. So there is something else out there. And so anyhow, I traveled a lot with Praxair during that role. And then I moved into, I had an opportunity to take over like 5 different engineering departments that focused on applications from, had accountability for cryogenic storage systems, trucking, because we had the technology on the trailers that hauled cryogenic liquids. So I was accountable for trucking engineering, customers, or the cryogenic tank operations side, engineering, and combustion equipment, so burners that go into steel furnaces and glass furnaces. Part of my team was the implementation crew or execution crew for putting in combustion systems and wastewater treatment systems. So that was a kind of cool. But you know, in that role, there was something that I think was important that I learned some context on. Being enlisted in the military and not having a college education. When I came out, I had a lot of skill. And I did well, but there was an element of discipline, mind discipline, that I did not have. And I went back to school. Right after I had accountability for these engineering departments, I decided I should finish my bachelor's degree because I had done some before. And so, you know, going back to the fundamentals in getting my bachelor's now was really essential for me to be able to be more structured in how I communicated, for example, and how I thought, because I was unstructured in the way my brain worked. Until I buckled down and focused on the fundamentals with getting my bachelor's. And then subsequent to that, I got a master's in organizational leadership as well. But I think a lot of conversations I had back then with colleagues and whatnot that were in the same situation, there wasn't a real appreciation for the value of, it's more than just a piece of paper sometimes. And so I encourage people to think about that and just get some fundamentals to help you be more structured in your communications, you know, writing and things like that, because that's really important for a career.
Yeah. Excellent. And today, what is your day-to-day now, and what's keeping you driving, I guess I could ask? So coming back to the volunteer part of things, sure. 23 years ago, I think, you know, starting shortly after I moved to Buffalo in 1999, I joined I bought a bike, and I heard about this cancer bike ride that sounded like a cool thing to go do, and it was the Ride for Roswell. And I went to it, and that changed my life. You know, I learned at the Ride for Roswell about 1 in 3 women and 1 in 2 men that are impacted by cancer at some point in their lives. And I thought, you know, that's crazy. Those stats are crazy. And, you know, quickly kind of deducted that more people die from cancer every single year than all of the wars we've ever fought. All of them. Yeah. And, you know, I was looking for a mission. I mentioned before that I lost my identity, kind of like, what's my purpose? There's got to be more out there. And so after I researched Roswell and found out
are they really doing something about this disease? Became convinced that they are. And I figuratively raised my right hand again and said, I'm committed to this fight. Let's kill cancer. And so I became involved with the leadership of the Ride for Roswell back, and then I joined the Roswell Park Alliance Community Board in I think it was 2004. And was very involved with the Ride for Roswell. I became one of the co-chairs of the Ride for Roswell, and the Ride for Roswell has about 8,000 cyclists now and raises north of $5 million a year for Roswell Park. And then in 2013, we were trying to figure out ways to get more revenue to kind of help replace some of the funding we were getting from the state, because every time there was a budget, and it was that there was money at risk. And I knew some of these researchers and what they were working on, and there was this cloud over your head about, am I going to get funding next year for this really important, promising work? Right. And so the idea came up to have a new ride that brought in money from out of market. And so we started the Empire State Ride, which goes from New York City through every major city in the state and ends in Niagara Falls. So that was in 2014. That I thought it was a fantastic idea, and all my friends thought I was nuts. So I did it by myself to kind of say, hey, a guy like me can do this. And so we went from 1 to 60 to 100 and something, and now we've been over 200 riders a year for a few years now.
That's fantastic.
And we've raised north of $6 million since 2014, and this year registration is open. The event is on the last week of July, and we're already about halfway, not quite, but just a little bit south of halfway to meeting our goal for number of riders for next year. So
that's fantastic, Terry. I want to make sure I get that information for folks that want to learn more about the specific ride. Could you tell me the website, and I'll make sure that we have it online as well.
Sure, yeah. So it's EmpireStateRide.com. There's also follows on Facebook, just Empire State Ride. We're also on LinkedIn, but the best place to get information is the website. It's a great website. There's videos, pictures, all the information that you need to know on EmpireStateRide.com. You can also go there and donate, which would be greatly appreciated. That's kind of what it's all about. And registration's open. So EmpireStateRide.com.
Excellent, Terry. We're going to wrap up in a minute. I'm going to give you the final word here. It's my last question. Mm-hmm. And after sharing your story, I'm gonna give you a rule here. We're gonna make it a family gram. So I want you to visualize going back to the farm, talking to young Terry, 17, 18, not in the service yet, but about to be. What's one thing you want to warn yourself or encourage yourself with? What's the message before you became a veteran that you wish you knew and you'd like to say now?
I wished, and I would say, to learn more about God. I think, so I did that in less than 40 words.
Yeah, there you
learn
go.
more about God.
Because there is more.
and I think subsequent, in the past several years, my relationship with God has gotten stronger, and I really wish I would have had the discipline associated with just understanding the Bible more. I think to me, it's a rule book. And that's not the right way. It's a guidebook.
It's a field manual.
It's like a field manual. And, humans are predictable. They do the same things we do the same things over and over and over and over again, and it's documented there. So it's kind of like, what happens if? Well, it's written. And you just got to read it. And, I just think that's a fantastic foundation that probably would have steered me in some things a lot better than riding my boat without a tiller sometimes.
Well said. We'll leave it at that. Folks, we're going to take a short break, and we've been talking with and just wrapped up our conversation with Terry Bourgeois. And you can learn more about his current journey as he rides with Empire State Ride. And once again, that website?
EmpireStateRide.com.
Perfect. We'll be back in just a bit.